The compound sat hidden in the Utah desert like a fortress of secrets, its high walls keeping the world out and its prisoners in. Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the adoption papers spread across her kitchen table, the proof she'd been searching for her entire adult life. At 14, they told her she was marrying her spiritual brothers to keep the bloodline pure. For 20 years she believed the lies, bore children she couldn't protect, and watched others disappear into the night for asking too many questions. But those adoption papers changed everything. The 3 men she'd been forced to call husbands weren't her siblings at all. They were strangers, victims of the same elaborate deception that had stolen her childhood. Now, at 34, Sarah had built a new identity, a successful business, and most importantly, a plan. The cult's leader, the man who called himself her father, had no idea she'd been gathering evidence for years. Tonight, she would expose them all. But Sarah didn't know that her family had already discovered her betrayal, and they were coming to bring their wayward daughter home. What happens when the past refuses to stay buried? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's fingers traced the faded ink on the documents, her heart racing as she absorbed the implications. Marcus, David, and Benjamin, the 3 boys who had been thrust into her life as brothers when she was 12, had all been adopted into the Sacred Light family within months of each other. None of them were blood relatives. None of them were Prophet Abraham's biological children. The fluorescent light above her modest Phoenix apartment kitchen cast harsh shadows across the papers. But Sarah had never seen anything more clearly. Every forced ceremony, every night of terror, every pregnancy that bound her deeper to the compound's twisted hierarchy, all of it built on manufactured lies. Her phone buzzed against the laminate countertop. The contact name made her blood freeze. Mother Rachel. Sarah stared at the screen, watching it ring. She hadn't spoken to anyone from the compound in 3 years, not since she'd convinced them she was taking a spiritual journey to spread their message in the outside world. They believed she was a devoted daughter, slowly recruiting new members from her flower shop in Phoenix. The ringing stopped, then immediately started again. This time she answered, forcing her voice into the submissive tone that had kept her alive for so many years. Mother Rachel. Sister Sarah. The woman's voice carried that familiar mixture of honey and ice that had terrified Sarah since childhood. Prophet Abraham requires your immediate return. There are concerns about your mission. Sarah's free hand instinctively moved to cover the adoption papers. Concerns? I don't understand. My reports have been regular, and I've identified several potential families for recruitment. Your reports have been reviewed by the elders. There are inconsistencies, questions about your true devotion. A pause that felt like a blade against Sarah's throat. You have 24 hours to return home, sister. The prophet's patience wears thin. The line went dead. She moved to her bedroom and pulled out the emergency bag she'd kept packed for 2 years. Fake ID, cash, burner phone, and a USB drive containing every piece of evidence she'd collected about the Sacred Light family's crimes. Birth certificates, financial records, testimonies from other survivors, everything the FBI would need to bring down Prophet Abraham's empire. The original plan had been to gather more evidence, to build an airtight case before making contact with law enforcement. But 24 hours didn't leave room for caution. Sarah's laptop screen glowed as she composed an email to the FBI tip line, attaching the most damaging files from her collection. As she typed, memories flooded back. The ceremonies where children as young as 12 were sealed to adult men, the punishment chambers beneath the main temple, the mass graves hidden in the desert where unfaithful members were buried. Her finger hovered over the send button. Once she pressed it, there would be no going back. The life she'd carefully constructed in Phoenix would be over. The cult would never stop hunting her. But the alternative was worse. Return to the compound meant death, or something close to it. Prophet Abraham didn't tolerate betrayal, and he certainly wouldn't forgive a daughter who had learned too much about his secrets. Outside her window, Phoenix glittered in the desert night, a sprawling constellation of ordinary lives and simple freedoms she'd never take for granted. Somewhere in that darkness, she knew they were coming for her. Sarah pressed send and began to run. The morning sun cast long shadows across the farmhouse kitchen as Sarah methodically packed lunchboxes, her movements precise and efficient despite the tremor in her hands. 3 years of freedom, and she still felt like she was playing house, mimicking a life she'd only seen in movies smuggled into the compound. "Mom, can I have extra cookies today?" Emma tugged at Sarah's cotton dress, her 7-year-old face bright with innocence that Sarah fought daily to preserve. "Of course, sweetheart." Sarah's voice caught slightly on the endearment. In her old life, children were possessions, not treasures to be cherished. She slipped 2 chocolate chip cookies into the small bag, watching Emma's delighted smile with wonder that never quite faded. The school bus honked outside, and Sarah walked her daughter to the door, waving until the yellow vehicle disappeared around the bend. Only then did she allow herself to breathe, to acknowledge the constant fear that gnawed at her stomach like hunger. Her phone buzzed against the kitchen counter. David's name flashed on the screen, and warmth flooded her chest, followed immediately by guilt. He didn't know. After 18 months together, countless nights of gentle touches and whispered promises, David Harper still believed her carefully constructed story about fleeing an abusive marriage in Montana. "Good morning, beautiful." His voice carried that easy confidence she'd grown to love, tinged with the slight roughness that meant he was already at the construction site. "Good morning." She pressed the phone closer to her ear, drawing comfort from the connection. "How's the Morrison project coming along?" "Ahead of schedule, which means I might actually make it home for dinner tonight. That is, if you'll have me." Home. He called her tiny rented farmhouse home, and sometimes she almost believed it could be true.
"I'd like that. Emma's been asking when you're coming over again."
There was a pause, loaded with unspoken words. They'd been dancing around the idea of him moving in, of making their makeshift family official. Sarah wanted it desperately and feared it completely. "Sarah, there's something I've been meaning to—" A car door slammed in her driveway, cutting him off. Through the kitchen window, Sarah watched a black sedan settle into the gravel, dust motes dancing in the morning light. 2 men emerged, their dark suits incongruous against the rural landscape. The phone slipped from Sarah's suddenly numb fingers, clattering against the linoleum. She knew those suits, that purposeful walk. She'd seen it 1,000 times as compound enforcers dealt with problems that needed to disappear. They'd found her. "Sarah? Sarah, what's wrong?" David's voice echoed tinnily from the fallen phone. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. 20 years of conditioning kicked in. Stand straight, eyes down, wait for instruction. But Emma's laughter from this morning, David's promises whispered in the dark, the life she'd built with desperate hope, it all crashed over her like cold water. The first man knocked, 3 measured raps that sounded like a death knell. Sarah forced her legs to work, each step toward the door feeling like walking through sand. Her hand trembled as she turned the deadbolt, a pathetic barrier that had given her the illusion of safety. "Sister Ruth." The older man's voice was exactly as she remembered, calm, authoritative, brooking no argument. Brother Samuel, the prophet's right hand, looked exactly the same despite the passing years. His pale eyes swept over her simple dress and pinned back hair with approval that made her skin crawl. "My name is Sarah." The words came out stronger than she felt. "Sarah Mitchell." His smile was patient, patronizing. "The prophet has been very concerned about you, sister. Very concerned indeed. It's time to come home. This is my home." But even as she said it, Sarah felt the old programming kick in, the voice in her head that whispered she was nothing, owned nothing, deserved nothing beyond what the prophet allowed. The second man, younger and harder looking, shifted behind Samuel. Sarah caught a glimpse of something metallic beneath his jacket, and her blood turned to ice. "Your situation has caused considerable difficulty," Samuel continued conversationally. Brother Marcus has been most displeased by your absence. A wife belongs with her husband. Marcus, her brother husband, the prophet's son, whose touch had stolen pieces of her soul for 15 years. The thought of his hands on her again made bile rise in her throat. I won't go back. The words surprised her with their firmness. Samuel's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. You have a daughter now, I understand. Emma, isn't it? Such a precious child. The prophet is very interested in meeting his granddaughter. The world tilted sideways. They knew about Emma. Sweet, innocent Emma, who believed her biggest worry was whether she'd get extra cookies in her lunch. You stay away from her. Sarah's voice cracked like a whip, maternal fury overwhelming 20 years of ingrained submission. Samuel stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more menace than any shout. You have 48 hours, Sister Ruth. Gather your things and return willingly, or we'll be forced to collect what belongs to the family, all of it. The fluorescent lights of the community center cast harsh shadows across Sarah's face as she gripped the edge of the folding table. 23 women sat in the circle, each clutching a styrofoam cup of coffee like a lifeline. This was her Tuesday night routine. Survivors supporting survivors, but tonight felt different. The familiar weight of being watched had returned. Sarah, you haven't shared in a while, said Dr. Martinez, the group facilitator. Her voice carried the practiced gentleness of someone who'd heard every horror imaginable. How are you feeling about the anniversary approaching? The anniversary. 3 years since she'd stumbled into that gas station bathroom, bleeding and broken, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a terror so deep it had taken months before she could sleep without checking every lock twice. Sarah's fingers unconsciously traced the thin scar along her collarbone, a reminder of her last night at the compound. I'm managing, Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. Work keeps me busy. It was a lie, but lies had kept her alive for 24 years. The truth was that she'd barely slept since spotting the familiar silhouette across from her apartment building 3 days ago. The way the figure stood, too straight, too still, reminded her of the watchers back at Eden's Gate. Brother Marcus always said the faithful never stop searching for lost sheep. Managing isn't the same as healing, pressed Jenny, a rail-thin woman with track marks fading along her forearms. You always clam up when we talk about moving forward, about trusting people. Sarah's jaw tightened. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Trust was what kept the other wives compliant when Brother Marcus decreed that bloodlines meant nothing within their sacred family. Trust was what made her sister-wife Rebecca nod obediently when told that bearing children for the prophet was God's highest calling. The memory hit her like a physical blow, Rebecca's lifeless eyes during the ceremony that bound her to their shared husband, who was also their brother. Sarah had been 14 then, watching her 12-year-old sister accept a fate that would eventually kill her during a botched home birth 5 years later. Sometimes survival is enough, Sarah said quietly. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. But you've done more than survive, Sarah. You've built a life. You have your apartment, your job at the library, this community. That takes incredible strength. Strength. If only they knew how close she'd come to breaking just this morning when she'd found the envelope slipped under her door. No postmark, no return address, just her real name. Not Sarah Chen, the identity she'd carefully constructed, but her birth name written in the precise script she remembered from childhood lessons. Inside, a single photograph, her younger brother Timothy, now grown, standing beside a missing person flyer with her face on it. The message was clear. They knew where she was. I need to use the restroom, Sarah said abruptly, standing so quickly her chair scraped against the linoleum. The bathroom mirror reflected a stranger's face back at her. 3 years of regular meals had filled out her gaunt cheeks, and professional hair dye had turned her distinctive red hair a mousy brown. Contact lenses changed her eyes from green to hazel. She'd thought the transformation was enough, but Brother Marcus had always been thorough in his teachings about hunting. The phone rang twice before Rivera answered. Sarah? Everything okay? They found me, Sarah whispered. I think they've been watching for days. A pause. Then Rivera's voice, sharp and professional. Where are you now? Community Center on 5th Street. Carmen, there's something else. Sarah's voice broke slightly. They have my brother with them. Timothy. He was only 8 when I left. Listen to me carefully, Rivera said. Finish your meeting like nothing's wrong. Drive to the safe house we discussed. You remember the address? I'm calling it in now. Sarah closed her eyes, thinking of Timothy's gap-toothed smile, the way he used to hide in her skirts during the prophet's longer sermons. He'd be 17 now, old enough to be married off himself, old enough to have children with his own sisters and cousins. What if he's not there willingly? She asked. What if they're making him help? Then we'll figure it out. But first, we keep you alive. Through the bathroom's small window, Sarah could see the parking lot. Her beat-up Honda sat under the streetlight where she'd left it, but now a dark sedan idled at the lot's far end. Even from this distance, she could make out the rigid posture of the driver. They weren't hiding anymore. The burner phone buzzed against Sarah's palm as she sat in her Honda Civic, parked 3 blocks from the elementary school where Emma would emerge in 20 minutes. The number on the screen made her stomach clench. Marcus Chen, the FBI agent who'd helped orchestrate her escape from the compound 2 years ago. They found the safe house in Portland. His voice was tight, professional, but she caught the underlying concern. How fast can you move? Sarah's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Through the windshield, she watched normal parents gathering at crosswalks, chatting about soccer practice and piano lessons. The mundane beauty of it all suddenly felt fragile as glass. What happened to the Hendersons? Relocated yesterday. The eternal light had people watching the house for at least a week before we caught on. Marcus paused. Sarah, they're not just looking anymore, they're mobilizing. We intercepted communications suggesting Prophet Daniel's authorized what they call divine retrieval. The words hit her like ice water. Divine retrieval meant her brother-husband Joseph wouldn't be the only one hunting her now. It meant the entire congregation, nearly 300 people, would consider finding her a sacred duty. It meant they'd kill anyone who stood between them and bringing her back to face Prophet Daniel's justice. I need 48 hours, she whispered, watching a crossing guard in an orange vest wave cheerfully at approaching children. Emma has a school presentation tomorrow. She's been practicing for weeks. Sarah, 48 hours, Marcus. We'll disappear after that, I promise. But I can't rip her away from this without warning. Not again. She'd done it before, 3 months ago when they'd fled Sacramento. The look of confusion and hurt in Emma's eyes when Sarah pulled her from her first real friendships still haunted her dreams. Her daughter had adapted because she was resilient, because she trusted her mother completely, but Sarah couldn't keep asking an 8-year-old to sacrifice everything for a war she never chose. Marcus's sigh crackled through the phone. I'll try to buy you time, but you need to understand, they found Portland because someone talked. Either they broke one of our contacts or they have help from outside the cult. The implications settled in her chest, like a stone. Someone in the federal system might be compromised. The network of safe houses, false identities, and protective contacts that had kept her alive for 2 years could be crumbling. There's something else, Marcus continued. The body they found in Oregon last week? The Jane Doe in the river? DNA came back. Rebecca Stanton. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Rebecca had escaped 6 months before Sarah, one of Prophet Daniel's younger wives who'd tried to take her infant son and run. They said she drowned. An accident. Coroners changing the ruling to suspicious death. She had defensive wounds and traces of a paralytic drug in her system. His voice softened. I'm sorry. I know you two kept in touch. The school bell rang in the distance, a cheerful chime that now sounded like a funeral toll. Sarah watched the first wave of children burst through the doors, backpacks bouncing, voices carrying on the autumn air. Rebecca was dead. Sweet, frightened Rebecca, who'd called Sarah just last month, whispering about how her son was finally sleeping through the night, how she'd found a job at a bakery where the owner didn't ask too many questions about her past. We think so. And Sarah, her son is missing. The world tilted. 4-year-old Matthew, with his gap-toothed smile and his mother's dark curls. If the eternal light had him, he'd be raised to forget Rebecca entirely, molded into another generation of compliant believers. Emma appeared in the crowd of children, her red jacket bright as a cardinal among the autumn leaves. She scanned the pickup area until she spotted Sarah's car, then broke into a run, her face lighting up with the simple joy of seeing her mother. For a moment, Sarah let herself imagine they could keep running forever, that love and determination would be enough to stay ahead of the shadows pursuing them. 48 hours, she repeated to Marcus, then hung up before he could argue. Emma yanked open the passenger door, chattering immediately about her friend Zoe's new hamster and the science project they were planning together. Sarah listened with practiced attention, making the appropriate responses while her mind catalogued everything they'd need to abandon again. The apartment with its second-hand furniture and carefully chosen neighborhood. The job at the medical office where she'd finally started using her nursing training again. The illusion of safety they'd built one careful day at a time. "Mom, you're making your worried face," Emma said suddenly, her 8-year-old intuition cutting through Sarah's pretense like a knife. Sarah reached over and squeezed her daughter's small hand. "Just thinking about dinner. How does mac and cheese sound?" Emma's smile returned, bright and trusting, and Sarah's heart broke a little more. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Sarah pulled into the grocery store, her hands still trembling slightly on the steering wheel. 3 days had passed since the phone call, 3 days of jumping at every unexpected sound, of checking and rechecking the locks on her apartment door. She'd considered calling in sick to work again, but normalcy felt like her only anchor now. Inside the store, fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she gathered items mechanically. Milk, bread, coffee. The mundane ritual usually calmed her, but today every footstep behind her made her shoulders tense. At the checkout line, she found herself studying the faces of other customers, searching for anything familiar in their features, any hint of recognition in their eyes. "That'll be $27.50, the cashier said, her voice cutting through Sarah's paranoid spiral. Sarah fumbled with her wallet, dropping her credit card. As she bent to retrieve it, a man's voice behind her made her blood freeze. Miriam. The name hit her like a physical blow, her birth name, the one she'd buried along with everything else from her past. She straightened slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. The man standing behind her appeared ordinary, middle-aged, wearing a baseball cap and flannel shirt, but his eyes held a familiarity that made her stomach lurch. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she managed, her voice barely steady. "No confusion," he said quietly, stepping closer. "You're Miriam Fletcher, daughter of Prophet Samuel, wife to your brothers Jacob and Ezra. You disappeared 22 years ago." The cashier was staring now, along with the customer behind the man. Sarah's vision began to tunnel, but she forced herself to remain upright. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The prophet wants you home," the man continued, his voice taking on an almost gentle quality that somehow made it more threatening. "Your children miss their mother. Your husbands have been faithful, waiting for your return." Children. The word slammed into her consciousness like a freight train. In her desperate escape all those years ago, she'd left behind 2 small children, a 4-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son, whose parentage was a horrifying mystery even to her. The guilt she'd carried for abandoning them had nearly destroyed her in those first years of freedom. "Ma'am?" The cashier's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you okay?" Sarah grabbed her groceries without paying, pushing past the man who'd shattered her carefully constructed world. She heard him following but didn't look back, half running through the automatic doors into the parking lot. Her hands shook so violently she could barely get her key into the ignition. Her phone rang as she was emptying her bathroom medicine cabinet. Detective Martinez's name appeared on the screen. "Sarah, we need to talk." His voice was grim. "There's been a development." "What kind of development?" She wedged the phone between her ear and shoulder, continuing to pack. "A body was found this morning about 50 miles north of the city. Male, mid-40s, wearing clothes consistent with fundamentalist religious groups. No identification, but there was something carved into his chest." Sarah's hands stilled. What was carved? A name. Miriam Fletcher. "You want to tell me what that means?" The phone slipped from her shoulder, clattering to the bathroom floor. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, the face she'd learned to think of as Sarah Chen, not Miriam Fletcher, the careful makeup, the professionally styled hair, the contact lenses that turned her naturally green eyes brown. All of it felt like a costume now, a flimsy disguise that had finally failed her. She picked up the phone. Martinez was still talking, his voice urgent and distant. "I'm sorry," she said, interrupting him. "I have to go." "Sarah, wait." She ended the call and immediately dialed another number. Tom answered on the second ring. "Hey, I was just thinking about you. How was your weekend?" "Tom, listen to me carefully. I need you to stay away from me for a while. Don't come to my apartment. Don't try to contact me." "What?" "Sarah, what's wrong?" "You're scaring me." She closed her eyes, memorizing the sound of his voice, the concern in it. After 22 years of careful isolation, she'd finally allowed herself to love someone. The cruelty of losing that now felt almost unbearable. "I can't explain, but you're in danger if you stay near me." "I'm sorry, Tom. I'm so sorry." She hung up before he could respond, then turned off her phone entirely. The suitcase closed with a decisive click. Sarah Chen had lasted longer than she'd ever hoped, but Miriam Fletcher's past had finally caught up with her. Sarah's hands trembled as she dialed Detective Morrison's number, watching through her kitchen window as Marcus loaded camping gear into his truck. She'd convinced him to take the boys to his brother's cabin upstate for the weekend, citing her need to catch up on work. The lie sat heavy in her stomach. Morrison speaking. "It's Sarah Chen. I need to see you, today." A pause. "What's happened?" "I can't explain over the phone. Can you meet me at the diner on 5th Street in an hour?" After Marcus and the boys drove away, their laughter fading into the distance, Sarah sat in her car outside the diner for 10 minutes, watching ordinary people live their ordinary lives. A mother pushed a stroller past her window. 2 teenagers shared earbuds, bobbing their heads to music. Normal, safe, everything she'd fought to build. Morrison was already in a back booth when she entered, his weathered face creased with concern. He'd been the detective who'd found her that night 2 decades ago, soaked in blood and barely coherent. He was one of only 3 people who knew her real identity. "You look like hell," he said without preamble. Sarah slid into the booth across from him, her back to the wall, a habit she'd never broken. "They found me." Morrison's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "The Covenant?" She nodded, pulling out her phone to show him the photos from yesterday. Morrison's jaw tightened as he swiped through the images of Ezra and the other men. "How many?" "At least 3, maybe more." Sarah's voice cracked. "Ezra was there. He was my first husband, before Jacob." Morrison had heard enough of her story over the years to understand the weight of that statement. What do they want? What they've always wanted. To bring me home. To make me face judgment for what I did. Sarah wrapped her hands around her untouched coffee cup, seeking warmth. "But it's more than that now. I have a family. Children, they're leverage. We need to move fast. Get you into protective custody." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "I won't run again. I won't tear my children away from their life because of my past." Morrison leaned forward. "Sarah, these people burned down 3 buildings looking for you 20 years ago. They killed a social worker who refused to give them information about safe houses. Running might be your only option. There has to be another way." The compound was raided 15 years ago. Most of the leadership was arrested, including Prophet Matthias. But some of them got away, went underground. We've had scattered reports over the years. Small cells, isolated families still practicing the old ways. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Matthias is in prison? Maximum security in Texas, but his influence, that's harder to contain. Morrison pulled out a notepad. I need you to tell me everything about yesterday, every detail. She walked him through the encounter at the school, describing Ezra's appearance, the other men, their vehicle. Morrison took notes, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. They're being careful, he said finally. No direct threats, no overt violations. Smart. They don't need to threaten me. I know what they're capable of. Sarah thought of Rachel, her sister-wife, who'd tried to help her escape years before Sarah finally succeeded. They'd found Rachel's body in the desert 3 days later. I'm going to put surveillance on your house, your family. Plainclothes officers, nothing obvious. Marcus will notice. Then maybe it's time to tell him the truth. The suggestion hung between them like a loaded gun. Sarah had constructed her entire life on the foundation of selective honesty. She was a survivor of abuse, she'd grown up isolated, she had no family. All true, but missing the devastating details that would shatter everything. He'll leave me, she whispered. You don't know that. I was married to my brothers, Jim. I had children with them. Children who died because I was too afraid to protect them properly. What kind of man could live with that? Morrison's expression softened. The kind who's loved you for 8 years without needing to know every detail of your past. A young waitress refilled their coffee cups, chattering about the weather. Sarah envied her innocence, her ability to worry about tips and weekend plans instead of whether armed men might be watching her children's school. Give me 48 hours, Sarah said finally. Let me figure out how to handle my family. Then we'll decide on next steps. Morrison nodded reluctantly. 48 hours. But Sarah, if they make any direct contact, you call me immediately. Don't try to handle this alone. Outside the diner, Sarah sat in her car and called Marcus. Having fun? Tommy caught a fish. Marcus's voice was warm with laughter. Well, technically the fish caught itself on his line, but we're calling it a victory. The normalcy of it nearly broke her. The burner phone buzzed against Sarah's hip as she restocked the pharmacy shelves, each vibration sending ice through her veins. She'd been expecting Marcus to call, but dread pooled in her stomach as she excused herself to the back room. They're moving faster than I thought. Marcus's voice was tight with urgency. My contact at the state police says there's been chatter about a multi-jurisdictional task force. Someone's been feeding them information about your location. Sarah's knees nearly buckled. She gripped the metal shelving unit, bottles of medication rattling. How is that possible? I've been so careful. There's a leak somewhere, or they've got better resources than we anticipated. The compound might have more connections to law enforcement than we realized. Marcus paused, and she could hear papers rustling. There's something else. They found Elena. The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Elena had escaped 3 years before Sarah, one of the few who'd made it out of the compound alive. She'd been Sarah's inspiration, proof that escape was possible. Found her how? Sarah whispered, though part of her already knew. Murdered. Made to look like a robbery, but my source says it has all the hallmarks of the Prophet's cleanup crew. Professional, thorough, sending a message. Sarah slumped against the wall, the familiar taste of copper flooding her mouth as old terror resurged. Elena had been living in Oregon under a new name, working as a teacher, building the kind of normal life Sarah desperately wanted. If they'd found her after 5 years, I need to run, Sarah said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Tonight, I'll pack what I can and disappear. Running won't solve this. They'll keep hunting you, and next time you might not have someone watching your back. Marcus's voice softened slightly. There's another option, but you're not going to like it. Tell me. We go on the offensive. My contact thinks the FBI is finally ready to take the compound seriously, but they need someone willing to testify, someone with first-hand knowledge of the crimes, the structure, the money trail. Sarah's stomach lurched. The thought of facing the prophet in court, of having her story dissected by lawyers and broadcast to the world, made her want to vomit. I can't. You know what they'll do to me if I surface publicly. They're already trying to kill you. At least this way you'd have federal protection and a chance to put them away permanently. Through the back room's small window, Sarah could see Dr. Peterson helping a customer at the counter. This place had become her sanctuary. These people had chosen family. The thought of abandoning them felt like ripping out a piece of her soul, but staying would only put them in danger. How long do I have to decide? Hours, not days. My contact says the task force is planning raids on known safe houses tomorrow morning. Your apartment is on the list. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering Elena's kind face, her gentle voice during those secret conversations about life beyond the compound walls. Elena had made it 5 years in the outside world before they caught up with her. 5 years of freedom, of choosing her own path, of being truly alive for the first time. Maybe that was worth something. Maybe that was everything. There's a third option, Sarah said quietly. What if we could prove the compound has corrupted law enforcement, cut off their information pipeline? That's what I've been working on, but it's going to take time we don't have. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, connections, fragments of overheard conversations from her years in the compound. The prophet had always boasted about having friends in high places, about protection that reached far beyond their isolated community. The annual gathering, she said suddenly. It's happening next week. Every major donor, every political connection, every dirty cop on their payroll will be there. The prophet calls it his family reunion, but it's really a networking event for his criminal empire. You think we could get evidence at the gathering? I know we could. They get drunk, they get careless, they record everything for the prophet's archives. Sarah's pulse quickened as the plan took shape in her mind. But I'd have to go back. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. That's suicide, Marcus finally said. Even if you could get inside without being recognized, getting out alive would be impossible. Maybe. But it might be the only way to stop them permanently. Sarah thought of Elena, of all the other women still trapped behind those walls, of the children being born into that nightmare every day. And maybe some things are worth the risk. The burner phone felt heavy in her hand as she waited for Marcus's response, knowing that whatever he said next would determine whether she spent her remaining time running toward freedom or running toward home. The safe house smelled like stale coffee and industrial disinfectant, nothing like the lavender and fear that had permeated every corner of the compound. Sarah pressed her back against the cold wall, watching Detective Martinez pace the small living room while Agent Chen sat rigid at the kitchen table, her laptop casting blue light across her sharp features. "We've got movement," Chen announced, her fingers flying across the keyboard. 3 vehicles spotted on Highway 84, heading toward the state line. Black SUVs with tinted windows. Sarah's stomach clenched. She knew those vehicles, remembered the sound of their engines in the pre-dawn hours when father took his hunting trips, when people who asked too many questions in town simply disappeared. "That's still 2 hours out," Martinez said, glancing at his watch. "Plenty of time to move her again." "No." Sarah's voice surprised even herself with its firmness. "I'm tired of running." Martinez stopped pacing. "Sarah, these people don't operate by normal rules. Your testimony can put father away forever, but only if you're alive to give it." Through the window, she watched a neighbor loading groceries from her car, a toddler balanced on her hip. Such ordinary moments had once seemed impossible, like glimpses into another species' life. Now Sarah understood what she stood to lose. "Tell me about the others," she said quietly. "The ones who tried to leave before me." The silence stretched too long. Chen's typing stopped. "Sarah," Martinez began. "Tell me." Agent Chen closed her laptop with a soft click. 3 women in the last 15 years. One made it 6 months on the outside before they found her in a motel in Nevada. Another lasted a year, thought she was safe in Seattle. The third, Rebecca, Sarah whispered, her sister wife, the one who had whispered escape plans during their shared pregnancies, who had kissed her forehead the night before Sarah finally ran. We found her car in the river, Martinez said gently. But Sarah, you're different. You have evidence, physical proof of what happened in that place. Sarah touched her jacket pocket, where the flash drive waited like a small explosive device. Security footage, financial records, birth certificates that told impossible stories of genetics and control. Rebecca had died gathering that information. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Martinez tensed. Don't answer it. But Sarah was already swiping to accept. Father's voice filled the room like poison gas. My dear daughter. The same honey-smooth tone that had accompanied every violation, every forced sacrament. You've caused such worry in your family. I'm not your daughter, Sarah said, her voice steadier than her hands. A low chuckle. Blood is blood, Sarah. Marriage is marriage. The outside world has filled your head with false concepts, but we can cleanse that confusion when you come home. Martinez was already on his radio, calling for a trace. I know about Rebecca, Sarah said. About what you did to her. Rebecca made her choice, just as you're making yours. The warmth drained from Father's voice, leaving something arctic behind. But consider this. How many people in that pretty little neighborhood are going grocery shopping today? How many children walking to school? Sarah's blood turned to ice water. Through the window, the neighbor was helping her toddler out of the car seat. If you hurt anyone, consequences, my dear. Actions have consequences. The address is 847 Maple Street, isn't it? Such a lovely blue house. The line went dead. Chen was already moving, weapon drawn. We need to evacuate the block. Now. But Martinez was studying Sarah's face. What are you thinking? Sarah closed her eyes, seeing Rebecca's secret smile, remembering the other women who had never made it past the compound gates, too afraid to try. She thought of her children still trapped in that place, growing up in the same nightmare that had shaped her entire existence. He's right about consequences, she said, opening her eyes. It's time he faced some. Sarah, no. Whatever you're planning, I know how he thinks, where he'll be. Those SUVs aren't coming here to take me back alive. I know too much now. He's coming to silence me permanently and send a message to anyone else thinking about leaving. She pulled out her phone again, scrolling through the contacts Agent Chen had helped her establish. Dr. Williams, her therapist, Amanda from the support group, Lisa, who had offered her a job at the bookstore. An entire life, built one careful connection at a time. There's a place, Sarah said slowly, where the compound property meets the national forest. Rebecca showed it to me once, an old ranger station. If he's planning to finish this personally, that's where he'll want to do it. Isolated. Easy to make bodies disappear. Martinez was shaking his head. Absolutely not. We're not using you as bait. You're not using me as anything, Sarah said, standing up. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of her own choices, the terrible and wonderful burden of agency. I'm offering. The safe house smelled of stale coffee and industrial disinfectant, nothing like the lavender and sage that had filled Ruth's small apartment above the bookstore. She pressed her palm against the bulletproof glass, watching the empty street below through Venetian blinds that cast prison bar shadows across her face. 3 days had passed since Detective Martinez pulled her from her old life, and the silence felt more oppressive than any sermon she'd endured in the compound. You need to eat something, Martinez said, setting a plate of scrambled eggs on the folding table behind her. The detective looked as tired as Ruth felt, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd been sleeping here too, or not sleeping at all. Ruth turned from the window but didn't sit. How long? Until the trial? Could be months. Depends on how quickly we can... No. Ruth's voice carried the sharp edge she'd developed over 6 years of independence. How long until they find me? Martinez hesitated, and that pause told Ruth everything she needed to know. The marshals had been confident when they'd first brought her here, speaking in acronyms about witness protection protocols and secure locations, but yesterday one of them had quietly reinforced the locks. This morning they'd changed the guard rotation again. 3 more women came forward, Martinez said instead of answering. Your testimony gave them courage. Ruth finally sat, though she didn't touch the food. Sarah Whitmore. I knew her when she was 8, before they gave her to Jacob. She closed her eyes, remembering the girl's laugh, the way she'd hidden behind Ruth's skirts during prayer meetings. What did they do to her? Same pattern. Forced marriage at 14, multiple pregnancies, complete isolation. She escaped 2 years ago but was too terrified to speak until now. The weight of responsibility settled on Ruth's shoulders like the heavy wool shawls they'd made her wear in winter. Every woman who came forward put herself at risk, but staying silent meant letting Prophet Samuel continue destroying lives. The mathematics of survival had always been brutal in her world. Her phone buzzed against the table, and Martinez tensed. Ruth had been allowed to keep it for normalcy's sake, but every call was monitored, every text scrutinized. It's Claire, Ruth said, recognizing her friend's number. The woman who ran the literacy program where Ruth volunteered, who'd become the closest thing to family she'd known outside the compound. Martinez nodded, and Ruth answered. Ruth, thank God. Claire's voice crackled through the speaker, strained with panic. Someone broke into the bookstore. Mrs. Henderson called me when she saw the police cars. Ruth's blood turned to ice water. When? Last night, sometime after midnight. They didn't take the register, didn't touch the rare books. But your apartment... Claire's voice broke. Everything's destroyed. Your photos, your furniture, even your plants. Whoever did this was angry. The phone slipped from Ruth's fingers. Martinez caught it, speaking quickly to Claire while Ruth stared at the wall, seeing instead the small space she'd so carefully constructed. The reading nook by the window where she'd spent countless evenings learning about the world beyond barbed wire fences. The kitchen table where she'd written her victim impact statement, each word carved from years of buried pain. They want me to know, Ruth whispered when Martinez ended the call, that I can run, but I can't hide. We'll get them, Ruth. Every one of them. You don't understand. Ruth stood abruptly, pacing to the window again. This isn't just about stopping testimony. Prophet Samuel taught us that betrayal demands blood atonement. He's not trying to silence me anymore. She turned to meet Martinez's eyes. He's preparing my execution. The detective's hand moved instinctively to her service weapon. The marshals will move you again. New city, new identity if necessary. And what about Sarah? What about the others coming forward? Do they all disappear too? Ruth shook her head. That's not living. It's just a different kind of prison. It's temporary. Once we have enough evidence, there will never be enough evidence for men like Samuel. Ruth's voice carried 20 years of hard-earned wisdom. He's been untouchable this long because he makes people disappear. Witnesses, prosecutors, anyone who threatens him. Outside, a car engine turned over and both women froze until they recognized the sound of the evening guard shift arriving. The mundane noise of ordinary life, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. Ruth wondered if it ever would again. I want to call the others, Ruth said finally. The women who came forward. They need to know what they're really facing. Martinez nodded slowly, and then... Ruth pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching shadows lengthen across the empty street. Somewhere out there, Prophet Samuel's hunters were closing the distance, following a trail of destruction toward this fragile sanctuary. She could run again, disappear into witness protection's bureaucratic maze, but that meant abandoning everything she'd fought to build. Then we stop running, she whispered. The safe house smelled like stale coffee and fear. Sarah pressed her back against the cold kitchen wall, watching Detective Morrison pace between the mismatched furniture while Agent Chen studied surveillance photos spread across the dining table. 3 days had passed since the attack at her apartment, and the walls seemed to close in a little more each hour. "We found the van," Morrison said, his phone still pressed to his ear. "Burned out in a quarry 30 miles south. No prints, no DNA. These people know what they're doing." Sarah's hands trembled as she poured herself another cup of coffee. The compound had trained them all to be invisible when necessary, to move without leaving traces. She'd hoped that knowledge would only serve her escape, not be turned against her by those still trapped in that world. The facial recognition came back on 2 of the men from the security footage, Chen announced, looking up from her laptop. "Brothers, Marcus and David Kellerman, both have connections to militia groups in 3 different states." The names meant nothing to Sarah, but the description sent ice through her veins. Father always recruited from the outside, men who were already angry, already lost. He promised them purpose, wives, a place in his kingdom. She set down her mug with shaking hands. They're the most dangerous ones because they chose to be there. Morrison ended his call and joined them at the table. "Your book publisher is getting nervous. The media attention from the attack has the whole industry spooked. They're talking about postponing the release." "No." The word came out sharper than Sarah intended. "That's exactly what they want. If I hide, if I stop fighting, then everyone still trapped there suffers for nothing." "Sarah, we're talking about your life here," Chen said gently. "The book will still matter if it comes out 6 months from now." But Sarah knew better. She'd watched the news cycles, seen how quickly the world moved on from inconvenient truths. Her story had momentum now. People were listening, and that window wouldn't stay open forever. Every day she remained silent was another day children grew up thinking the compound's twisted version of normal was all there was. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Your sister Rebecca is pregnant again. 4th child. She asked me to tell you she thinks about your words every day." Sarah's breath caught. Rebecca had been 12 when Sarah escaped, barely old enough to understand what was happening. Now she was trapped in the same cycle, bearing children for men who saw her as property. "They're using the others to get to me," she whispered, showing them the message. "This is how they maintain control. Everyone becomes leverage against everyone else." Chen photographed the phone screen. "We can trace this, but they're probably using burner phones, switching locations constantly." Another message appeared. "The children miss their aunt. Maybe it's time for a family reunion." Sarah closed her eyes, remembering small faces that had watched her leave that night 2 decades ago. Some of them would have children of their own now, continuing the cycle she'd broken for herself but couldn't break for them. "There's something I haven't told you," she said quietly. Morrison and Chen looked up expectantly. Father didn't just let people leave because it was impossible. He let them go because he knew they'd always come back. "What do you mean?" "The guilt, the programming, the knowledge that your family is suffering while you're free." Sarah's voice grew stronger, clearer. "I've fought it every day for 20 years. The voice telling me I'm selfish, that I abandoned everyone who needed me, that my freedom came at the cost of their suffering." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ordinary suburban street where ordinary families lived ordinary lives. That's his real power. Not the walls or the guards or the isolation. It's the chains he puts in your mind that keep you trapped even after you escape. "Is that what this is about?" Morrison asked carefully. "You're not trying to protect your new life. You're trying to save the old one." Sarah turned back to them, something crystallizing in her expression. "The book was never about my escape. It was about going back for the others. And now they've given me exactly the excuse I need." Chen shook her head immediately. "Absolutely not. We are not using you as bait. That's suicide." "It's not bait if it's a rescue mission." Sarah moved back to the table, her movement suddenly purposeful. "You want them to stop hunting me? Then we take away what they're protecting. We expose the compound completely, document everything, get federal agents inside those walls." "Sarah, listen to yourself," Morrison said. "You're talking about infiltrating a fortified location with armed guards and decades of paranoia built into every system." Sarah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Detective, I lived there for 20 years. I know every secret passage, every blind spot, every weakness Father never imagined I'd noticed. She looked between them, her decision already made. The question is whether you're going to help me save them or if I'm doing this alone. The cabin's floorboards groaned under Sarah's weight as she paced the small living room, her phone clutched in her trembling hand. Detective Morrison's words echoed in her mind. They know where you work. They know your routine. The carefully constructed life she'd built over the past 5 years was crumbling like sand through her fingers. Marcus emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee, his face etched with concern. You need to sit down before you wear a hole in the floor. I can't just sit, Sarah's voice cracked. Every second we waste here is another second they get closer. They found my apartment, Marcus. They were inside my home. The memory of her ransacked bedroom sent fresh waves of nausea through her stomach. Drawers pulled out, clothes scattered, her few precious photographs torn and trampled. But worse than the violation was the message they'd left. A single white lily placed deliberately on her pillow, the same flower Father Solomon had made her carry at each of her forced wedding ceremonies. Marcus set the mugs on the weathered coffee table and moved toward her, his hands raised in a calming gesture. Hey, look at me. When she finally met his eyes, he continued, We're going to figure this out. Morrison's got units watching the compound, and this place is off the grid. You're safe here. Sarah wanted to believe him, but safety had always been an illusion in her world. Even now, 20 miles from the nearest town and surrounded by dense Montana wilderness, she felt exposed. The compound had taught her that walls were meaningless when you were being hunted by people who considered themselves above earthly laws. You don't understand what they're capable of, she whispered. When I was 12, a girl named Rebecca tried to run. They brought her back after 3 days. Sarah's hands unconsciously moved to her throat. Father Solomon made all of us watch while he made an example of her. She never spoke again after that, never even looked anyone in the eye. Marcus's jaw tightened, and she saw his hands clench into fists at his sides. He'd heard pieces of her story over the months they'd grown closer, but she'd never shared the worst parts. Some memories were too poisonous to speak aloud. The satellite phone buzzed, making them both jump. Sarah's heart hammered as she answered. Sarah, it's Morrison. We've got a problem. The detective's voice was tense. We lost contact with the surveillance team watching the compound about an hour ago. What do you mean, lost contact? Radio silence. When backup arrived, they found the vehicles abandoned. No signs of struggle, but both officers are missing. Sarah sank onto the couch, her legs suddenly unable to support her. This was exactly what she'd feared. The brothers had resources and connections that extended far beyond their isolated mountain community. Local law enforcement, politicians, even federal agents had been compromised over the years. Father Solomon collected secrets the way other men collected coins. There's more, Morrison continued. We intercepted communications, suggesting they've split into multiple search teams. They're not just looking for you anymore, Sarah. They're looking for anyone who might be helping you. Marcus stepped closer, and Sarah realized with horrible clarity that her presence had painted a target on his back. This kind, patient man, who'd shown her what real love looked like, was now in mortal danger because of her. I have to go, she said quietly into the phone. I have to turn myself in. Absolutely not. Morrison's voice was sharp. That's exactly what they want. The moment you surface, you disappear forever. We need to move you to federal protection. And how long will that last? A year? 5 years? They waited 2 decades for me to make a mistake, detective. They can wait longer. Sarah stood up, her decision crystallizing with each word. I won't let innocent people die because of me. Marcus grabbed her wrist gently but firmly. Don't you dare give up now, not after everything you've survived. She looked at his face, really looked at it, memorizing the laugh lines around his eyes, the small scar on his chin from a childhood accident, the way his dark hair curled slightly behind his ears. In another life, in another world, maybe they could have had something beautiful together. I'm not giving up, she said softly. I'm ending this. Before either Marcus or Morrison could respond, she disconnected the call and moved toward the cabin's back window. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, dark and primordial. Somewhere out there, her brothers were hunting her with the patience and determination that Father Solomon had drilled into them since birth. But Sarah had learned things in the outside world that the compound had never taught her. She'd learned about evidence and witnesses and legal systems that existed beyond one man's twisted interpretation of Scripture. Most importantly, she'd learned that sometimes the only way to stop running was to turn and fight. The burner phone's shrill ring cut through the silence of Sarah's apartment at 3 a.m. She jolted awake, her heart hammering against her ribs as muscle memory from 2 decades of fear kicked in. Only Detective Morrison had this number. They found the safe house. Morrison's voice was tight with exhaustion and something else, defeat. Rachel's gone. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Rachel, her youngest sister-wife, had been in protective custody for barely 48 hours after finally agreeing to testify against the covenant. Now the 18-year-old had vanished without a trace. "How?" Sarah whispered, though she already knew. The covenant's reach extended far beyond the compound's razor-wire fences. They had people everywhere: social services, law enforcement, even the courts. Inside job. Had to be. The marshals are investigating, but... Morrison's pause spoke volumes. "Sarah, they left something behind. A message." The words hit her like a physical blow. She gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles white in the dim light filtering through her blackout curtains. What did it say? "The prodigal daughter will return what was stolen, or more will follow her path." Sarah closed her eyes, fighting the nausea that always accompanied thoughts of Elder Matthias and his twisted interpretation of Scripture. She'd stolen more than just herself when she'd escaped. She'd taken Rachel's location, the compound's financial records, and worst of all, she'd shattered the carefully constructed lie that the outside world couldn't touch them. "There's more," Morrison continued. "We intercepted communications suggesting they're planning something bigger, a mass relocation. If they disappear into the network of sister compounds across state lines, the other wives will never get out." Sarah finished the thought, her voice hollow. She'd spent 3 years building a new life, creating the underground Rachel network to help other escapees, but it would all crumble if the covenant succeeded in going deeper underground. She stood on shaking legs, already reaching for the go-bag she'd kept packed since the day she'd testified before the grand jury. Old habits died hard, and the habit of being ready to run had kept her alive this long. "Where are you?" Morrison asked, hearing the rustling movement through the phone. "Getting ready to do something incredibly stupid." Sarah pulled on dark jeans and a black hoodie, her movements mechanical. "They want me to come home? Fine. But I'm not coming empty-handed." "Sarah, no. That's exactly what they want. You walk into that compound and you'll disappear just like Rachel. We'll find another way." But Sarah was already at her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed the encrypted files she'd sworn never to use. The Covenant's financial network wasn't just built on the labor of its captive wives. It was a sophisticated money laundering operation that funneled cash to extremist groups across the country. She'd documented everything during her last months inside, memorizing account numbers and transaction records that could bring down more than just Elder Matthias. "The FBI has been after the Covenant's money trail for years," she said, uploading the files to a secure server. "I'm giving them everything. Account numbers, shell companies, the whole network. But I need to be inside when it goes down, or they'll kill everyone and burn the evidence." Morrison's sharp intake of breath told her he understood. The Covenant wasn't just a polygamist cult. It was a criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity for decades because of its religious facade and political connections. But financial crimes were federal jurisdiction, and even corrupt local officials couldn't stop federal agents with warrants. "The raid would take days to organize," Morrison warned, "and you'd be walking in blind." "Not blind." Sarah pulled up the compound's layout on her screen, the blueprints she'd sketched from memory and refined over years of nightmares. I know every building, every guard rotation, every bolt hole. And I know something else. They're expecting the broken woman who escaped 3 years ago. They're not expecting what I've become. She wasn't the same terrified girl who'd stumbled out of the desert with nothing but the clothes on her back. 3 years in the outside world had taught her things the Covenant couldn't imagine. How to fight back, how to use the system against itself, how to turn their own weapons against them. The phone was silent for a long moment before Morrison spoke again. "What do you need?" Sarah smiled grimly as she tucked a small recording device into her jacket pocket. 48 hours and a federal task force on standby. I'm going to give them their prodigal daughter, but first I'm going to burn their kingdom to the ground. She ended the call and stared at her reflection in the dark window. Tomorrow, she would return to hell, but this time she was bringing the fire with her. The safe house smelled like industrial disinfectant and stale coffee, a sterile cocoon that felt nothing like safety to Sarah. She sat curled in the corner of the threadbare couch, watching Agent Martinez pace between the kitchenette and the barred windows. Every few minutes, his radio crackled with updates from the field team still searching for Daniel and the others. "They hit 3 more locations overnight," Martinez said, setting down his phone. "A motel in Flagstaff, a truck stop outside Phoenix, and a gas station in Sedona. Always asking about you, always leaving before local police arrive." Sarah's stomach churned. The Covenant's reach had always been vast, their network of sympathizers and suppliers stretching across state lines like invisible spider webs. But seeing it in action from the outside, watching them mobilize with military precision, made her realize how naive she'd been to think distance alone could protect her. "My daughter," she whispered. "Emma's still at the university. She doesn't know." "We've got people watching her," Martinez assured her. "Plainclothes officers, campus security briefed on the situation. She's safe." But Sarah knew better. The Covenant didn't operate like street criminals or even organized crime. They were patient, methodical, willing to wait weeks or months for the perfect opportunity. Elder Jeremiah had taught them that patience was a virtue blessed by their twisted interpretation of Scripture. Her phone buzzed. Emma's name appeared on the screen, and Sarah's heart nearly stopped. "Don't answer it," Martinez warned, but Sarah was already swiping to accept. "Mom?" Emma's voice was tight with fear. "There are some men here asking about you. They're not police." The phone slipped from Sarah's nerveless fingers. Martinez caught it, pressing the speaker button. "Emma, where are you exactly?" he said. "Who is this?" "Mom, what's going on?" "I'm FBI Agent Martinez. Emma, I need you to listen very carefully. Are you somewhere safe right now?" "I'm in the library. There's people around. But these men, they were at my dorm earlier. My roommates said they were asking which classes I take, what my schedule is like." Sarah grabbed the phone back. "Emma, honey, you need to go to campus security right now. Tell them Agent Martinez sent you. Don't go anywhere alone, don't—" The line went dead. Martinez was already on his radio, barking orders to the campus detail, but Sarah could see it in his eyes, the same realization that was clawing at her chest. The Covenant had found Emma. "We need to go," Sarah said, standing. "Now. Absolutely not. You're the primary target. If we move you—" "They have my daughter." The words tore from her throat. "You don't understand how they think. Emma isn't just leverage to them, she's Covenant property by blood. They'll take her back to the compound and she'll disappear just like I did 20 years ago." Martinez's radio crackled again. "Agent Martinez, we've lost visual on the subject. Campus security found her backpack in the library, but she's gone." The room tilted sideways. Sarah gripped the back of the couch, fighting the urge to vomit. This was her fault, all of it. She'd brought this poison into Emma's life the moment she'd decided to testify. "The compound," she said. "They're taking her to the compound. We don't know that. They could be—" "No." Sarah's voice was iron now. "Daniel won't risk keeping her anywhere else. She's a loose end that needs to be contained, and the compound is the only place they feel truly safe. She moved toward the door, but Martinez blocked her path. "I can't let you leave. It's exactly what they want." "Then come with me." Sarah met his eyes. "You want to end this? You want to finally bring them down? The compound is where they'll make their stand. But you'll need me to get inside." Martinez shook his head. "We can't approach the compound without a warrant, without backup. The legal complexities alone. By the time you cut through the red tape, Emma will be gone forever." Sarah's voice broke. "Please. I know you have children. I know you understand." For a long moment, Martinez stared at her. She could see the war playing out behind his eyes, duty versus conscience, protocol versus justice. His radio crackled again. "Agent Martinez, we've got reports of a black SUV heading north on Highway 89. Arizona plates matches the description from the gas station footage." "That's the route to the compound," Sarah said quietly. Martinez closed his eyes, and Sarah knew she'd won. "This is completely against protocol," he said, reaching for his keys. "If this goes sideways, we're both finished." Sarah was already at the door. "If we don't try, Emma's finished." They stepped into the harsh Arizona sun, and Sarah felt the familiar weight of the desert pressing down on her shoulders. She was going home, back to the place that had shaped her nightmares for 2 decades. But this time, she wasn't going as a victim. The safe house felt like a tomb. Sarah pressed her back against the reinforced door, listening to Detective Morrison's hurried footsteps fade down the hallway. Through the bulletproof windows, she watched unmarked police cars position themselves around the perimeter, their occupants becoming shadows in the gathering dusk. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Hello, sister." The voice froze her blood. After all these years, Ezekiel's whisper still carried the same calculated menace that had haunted her childhood nights. "I know you can hear me, Sarah. Or do you prefer your worldly name now?" His laugh was soft, intimate. "You've caused quite a stir in our family. Father Matthias isn't pleased." Sarah's hand trembled as she gripped the phone. "You're supposed to be dead." "Death and rebirth, sister. You remember the teachings. I've been watching you build your little life. The apartment on Maple Street was cozy. Shame about what happened to it." The image of her destroyed home flashed through her mind. Overturned furniture, family photos scattered and torn, the word whore spray-painted across her bedroom wall in red letters that looked too much like blood. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted. For our family to be whole again. You have something that belongs to us." Sarah's free hand instinctively moved to her abdomen. The pregnancy test hidden in her purse confirmed what she'd suspected for weeks. Another secret. Another complication in an already impossible situation. "I don't have anything of yours. The documents you stole, the financial records, the photographs." His voice hardened. "And our child." The last words hit her like a physical blow. She sank onto the safe house's sparse sofa, memories flooding back, the forced ceremonies, the locked room, the months of isolation while her body changed against her will, the baby she'd been forced to give up before her escape. "Emma's not yours. She's just a child. She's 12 now, old enough for the preparation rituals. Father Matthias has been very patient, but patience has limits." Sarah's vision blurred with rage. Emma, sweet, innocent Emma, who she'd held for only minutes before the elders took her away. The daughter who didn't even know her real mother's name. "If you touch her, you're hardly in a position to make threats. But I'm feeling generous tonight. Meet me at the old grain elevator on Highway 78. Midnight, come alone, bring the documents, and we can discuss Emma's future. The police will never let me leave." "Oh, but they will. You see, I've been studying your new friends very carefully. Detective Morrison, for instance, divorced, custody battle over his own daughter. Agent Chen has a sister in San Francisco who works late shifts at the hospital, very predictable schedule." The threat was clear. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of helplessness settle over her shoulders like an old, unwanted coat. "And Sarah, if you're thinking of involving your protectors, Remember what happened to the last police officer who got too close to our business? Officer Bradley, wasn't it? Such a shame about his car accident. The line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, her mind racing. Through the thin walls, she could hear Morrison coordinating with his team, their voices low and urgent. They had no idea how deep the corruption ran, how many eyes and ears the collective had cultivated over the decades. She'd tried to warn them, but they saw only a small religious sect, not the sprawling criminal network that had tentacles, reaching into law enforcement, social services, even the courts. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Sarah?" "It's Dr. Martinez." She opened the door to find the crisis counselor holding 2 cups of tea. The woman's kind eyes took in Sarah's pale complexion immediately. "Rough night?" Sarah accepted the tea but didn't answer. How could she explain that her past wasn't just catching up, it was about to consume everything she'd fought to build? That somewhere in the compound's hidden depths, her daughter was probably being prepared for horrors that Sarah couldn't bear to imagine? "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," Dr. Martinez continued, settling into the opposite chair, "about the children still inside. The authorities are working on—" "It's too late." The words escaped before Sarah could stop them. "What do you mean?" Sarah met the doctor's concerned gaze. For a moment, she considered telling her everything, about the phone call, about Emma, about the impossible choice now facing her. But Morrison's warnings echoed in her memory. Trust no one, stick to the plan, let them handle it. Instead, she forced a weak smile. "I just feel like I've been running forever. Sometimes it feels like it'll never end." Dr. Martinez reached over and squeezed her hand. "It will end, Sarah. You're stronger than you know." If only that were true. Sarah nodded and sipped her tea, tasting nothing. Outside, the first police shift was changing over, new faces replacing old ones in the endless rotation of protection that felt more like a prison with every passing hour. 11:40 to 7 p.m. 13 minutes to make the choice that would define the rest of her life. The safe house felt like a tomb. Maya pressed her back against the kitchen wall, listening to Detective Rodriguez speak in hushed tones on her radio. Through the thin walls, she could hear Sarah moving restlessly in the bedroom, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion that had settled into their bones like lead. "They found the cabin," Rodriguez said, ending her call. Her face was grim. 3 bodies. "The fire department is still working to contain the blaze." Maya's stomach lurched. "Which 3? "Don't know yet. The bodies were badly burned." Rodriguez sat heavily at the small table. "But Maya, there's something else. The fire wasn't accidental. Someone set it deliberately." The implication hung between them like smoke. Either her brothers had eliminated witnesses to cover their tracks, or someone had turned against the others. Neither possibility offered comfort. Maya moved to the window, careful to stay behind the heavy curtains. The street looked peaceful in the early morning light. A few joggers, a neighbor walking their dog, children waiting for the school bus. Normal life continuing while her world burned down around her. "I should have stayed," she whispered. "Maybe I could have saved them." "You would have died with them," Rodriguez said firmly. "You made the only choice you could." But the guilt gnawed at her anyway. 20 years in that place, and she'd finally escaped only to watch it all come crashing down. How many people had she left behind? How many victims had she abandoned to save herself and Sarah? Her phone buzzed. An unknown number, but she recognized the rhythm of the rings immediately. 3 short, 2 long. The old signal from the compound. Rodriguez was at her side instantly. "Don't answer it." Maya stared at the screen until it went dark, then immediately lit up again. Same pattern. Someone was alive. Someone who remembered the codes. But who? "I have to," she said, reaching for the phone. "Maya, no. It could be Rebecca." The name of her youngest sister escaped like a prayer. Or one of the children. Before Rodriguez could stop her, Maya swiped to answer. She didn't speak, waiting. "Maya." The voice made her blood freeze. Not Rebecca, not one of the children. Joshua, her eldest brother, the one who'd taken over as leader after their father's death. "I know you're there, sister. I can hear you breathing." Maya's hand trembled, but she forced herself to speak. "Where are you?" "Closer than you think." His voice carried that familiar mixture of warmth and menace that had terrified her since childhood. "You've caused quite a stir, little bird, but it's time to come home. I am home." Joshua's laugh was soft, almost gentle. It was worse than if he'd screamed. "That child isn't yours, Maya. She belongs to the family. To me, she's my daughter. She's my wife. Promised to me before she could walk. You know the laws." Maya felt Rodriguez tense beside her, heard the detective speaking urgently into her radio. In the bedroom, Sarah had gone quiet, too quiet. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. "The compound is gone," she said. "I heard about the fire. Buildings can be rebuilt. The family endures." His voice dropped to a whisper. "We endure, Maya. We always have. Through persecution, through betrayal, through the weak-willed who try to break their sacred vows. I was never weak-willed. I was a child. You were chosen, blessed. And you threw it away for what? This half-life among the faithless?" Maya closed her eyes, remembering the weight of her wedding dress at 14, the cold metal of the ring that marked her as property, the years of shame and silence and stolen identity. "I threw it away for freedom." "Freedom?" Joshua's voice hardened. "Look around you, sister. Hiding in a government box, depending on strangers for protection, living in fear. Is this the freedom you chose?" Rodriguez was making frantic hand gestures, pointing toward the bedroom. Maya's blood turned to ice as understanding struck. "Sarah." The room was too quiet. "I have to go," Maya said. "Yes," Joshua agreed. "You do. She's waiting for you, Maya. She wants to come home." The line went dead. Maya dropped the phone and ran toward the bedroom, Rodriguez close behind. The door was closed. She'd left it open. Her hands shook as she turned the handle. The room was empty. The window stood open, curtains billowing in the morning breeze. On the pillow lay a single white flower, jasmine, the kind that grew wild around the compound, the kind Joshua used to leave as calling cards. Maya collapsed to her knees beside the bed, picking up the flower with trembling fingers. The scent transported her instantly back to that place of shadows and whispered prayers, where children learned to disappear and women learned to submit. Rodriguez was already coordinating the search, barking orders into her radio, but Maya knew it was too late. Joshua had Sarah now, and he would use her as bait to draw Maya back into the darkness she'd fought so hard to escape. The hunt had finally found her. The cabin's windows exploded inward as the first shots rang out, glass cascading across the wooden floor like deadly rain. Sarah threw herself behind the kitchen counter, her heart hammering against her ribs as splinters erupted from the wood above her head. Detective Morrison grabbed Emma, pulling her daughter toward the back bedroom while shouting coordinates into his radio. 3 vehicles, at least 8 men. He called out between bursts of gunfire. "We need backup now." Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the shotgun Morrison had given her earlier. The weight felt foreign in her palms, but the instructions he'd drilled into her echoed in her mind. Point, breathe, squeeze. She'd never imagined she'd need to use it so soon. "Mom!" Emma's terrified voice cut through the chaos from the bedroom. "Stay down, baby," Sarah called back, her voice steadier than she felt. "Everything's going to be okay." But even as the words left her mouth, she wondered if that was true. Through the shattered window frame, she could see shadows moving between the trees. The Prophet's men had found them despite all their precautions. 20 years of conditioning screamed at her to submit, to walk out with her hands raised and accept whatever punishment awaited her. But the sound of Emma's frightened breathing steeled her resolve. She was no longer Sister Sarah, property of the Eternal Light compound. She was a mother protecting her child. Morrison appeared beside her, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "The backup's still 15 minutes out. We need to hold them off until then. How many bullets do we have?" Enough if we're smart about it. He peered around the corner of the counter, immediately ducking back as another volley shattered what remained of the kitchen window. They're trying to flank us from the east side. Sarah nodded, surprised by her own clarity of thought. The terror was still there, but underneath it was something else, a fierce protectiveness she'd never been allowed to feel before. In the compound, children belonged to the prophet, not their mothers. But Emma was hers now, truly hers, and she'd die before letting them take her. "I can cover the back door," she said. Morrison looked at her with something like respect. "You sure?" "I'm sure." She crawled toward the rear of the cabin, keeping low as bullets continued to pepper the front wall. The back door was solid oak, but she could hear movement in the woods beyond. Footsteps on fallen leaves, whispered voices coordinating their approach. Through the door's window she caught a glimpse of a familiar face. Brother Marcus, the prophet's enforcer, the man who had administered countless punishments for her disobedience over the years. His presence here meant the prophet wasn't just sending hired help. This was personal. "Sarah of the Light!" Marcus called out, his voice carrying the same commanding tone that had once made her cower. "Come out now, and the child won't be harmed. The prophet is merciful to those who repent." She said nothing, gripping the shotgun tighter. "You know you can't hide forever," he continued. "You belong to us. You always have. That child was born of sacred union. She has her place in God's plan." The words sent ice through Sarah's veins. They weren't just here for her. They wanted Emma too. "The outside world has poisoned your mind," Marcus pressed on, his voice closer now. "But we can heal you. We can make you whole again." Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the years of healing sessions, the isolation chambers, the ritual cleansings, the way they'd convinced her that pain was purification and submission was love. But she also remembered Emma's laughter this morning as she'd helped make breakfast, the way her daughter's face lit up when she talked about starting school, the simple joy of choosing what to wear each day. That was wholeness, not the broken thing they'd tried to make her. The back door's handle turned slowly. Sarah raised the shotgun, her finger finding the trigger. Through the glass, she could see Marcus's confident smile, the same expression he'd worn during all those punishment sessions. He expected her to surrender. Even now, after everything, he couldn't imagine that she might fight back. The door swung open. "Hello, Sarah," Marcus said, stepping inside. "Time to come home." She pulled the trigger. The blast sent him flying backward off the small porch, his shocked expression frozen for an instant before he disappeared into the darkness. Shouts erupted from the woods as his men realized their enforcer was down. "Stay back!" Sarah screamed into the night, pumping another shell into the chamber. "I'm not that person anymore!" From the front of the cabin, she heard Morrison's approving shout, "That's how we do it!" For the first time in 20 years, Sarah smiled at the sound of violence. This was what freedom felt like. The warehouse smelled of rust and old motor oil, its cavernous space broken only by shafts of moonlight streaming through grimy windows. Sarah pressed herself against a concrete pillar, her breath coming in short, controlled bursts as footsteps echoed somewhere in the darkness behind her. She had led them here deliberately, away from Marcus and Detective Rodriguez, who were coordinating with the FBI task force 3 blocks away. Her phone buzzed with another text from Marcus. "Where are you? We're moving in now." She couldn't answer. Not yet. Not until she faced what she'd been running from for 8 years. "Sarah." The voice cut through the shadows like a blade. Elder Matthias stepped into the moonlight, his once imposing frame now gaunt, his eyes holding the same cold certainty that had haunted her childhood. "You've caused considerable trouble, daughter." "I'm not your daughter." She stepped from behind the pillar, keeping her distance but refusing to cower. "I was never your daughter. I was your prisoner." 3 more figures emerged from the darkness, brothers Isaiah and Caleb, and her stomach lurched as she recognized the third. David, her brother, her first husband, the boy who had once whispered apologies in the dark before the elders forced him to hurt her. "The family is broken without you," David said, his voice hollow. "Mother Ruth died calling your name. The children ask why their mother abandoned them. The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to crack her resolve. Sarah had spent years in therapy learning to recognize the manipulation, but hearing it from David's lips still made her chest tight with guilt. "I didn't abandon anyone," she said. "I escaped to prison. Those children, our children, they deserved better than what we could give them in that place. You corrupted them with your influence." Even after you left, Elder Matthias moved closer, his hand disappearing into his coat. The older ones started asking questions, started doubting the sacred order. "3 families have fallen because of your poison." "Good." The word came out stronger than she felt. "I hope they all fall. I hope every child in that compound finds the courage to run like I did." The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the enclosed space, but it wasn't Elder Matthias who fired. It was Isaiah, and his target was David, who had taken a step towards Sarah with something that might have been hope flickering in his eyes. David crumpled, clutching his shoulder, and Sarah realized with crystalline clarity that this had never been about bringing her back. This was about eliminating the evidence, the witnesses, the living proof of what they'd done. "You were always too soft," Elder Matthias told David's writhing form. "Even as a child, you lacked the strength for God's work." Sarah's hand found the small recording device in her pocket, the one Detective Rodriguez had given her. She'd been wearing a wire, but this was backup, and she needed them to keep talking. "What about the others who've left?" she asked, backing slowly toward what she hoped was a way out. "How many have you killed to protect your secrets?" Abigail drove her car into that lake herself. Caleb spoke for the first time, his voice matter of fact. "We simply helped her see the wisdom in it. And Jonathan's overdose was quite convincing, even to the coroner." Elder Matthias shot Caleb a warning look, but the damage was done. Sarah's device had captured it all: confessions to multiple murders, proof of the systematic elimination of cult survivors. The warehouse suddenly blazed with light as FBI agents flooded through every entrance. Sarah dropped to the ground as gunfire erupted around her, but Elder Matthias was already running toward a rear exit she hadn't seen. She couldn't let him escape. Not again. Sarah sprinted after him, her legs pumping as adrenaline overrode 8 years of nightmares. She tackled him just as he reached the door, both of them crashing to the concrete in a tangle of limbs. His hands found her throat, and for a moment she was 12 years old again, helpless and terrified. But she wasn't that child anymore. She drove her knee upward, breaking his grip, and rolled away as FBI agents surrounded them. "Sarah!" Marcus's voice cut through the chaos, and then his arms were around her, solid and real and safe. Elder Matthias was on his knees now, zip-tied and surrounded, but his eyes never left her face. "This isn't over," he said. "The family extends far beyond what you know. Others will come." Detective Rodriguez appeared beside them, her face grim. "We've got Isaiah in custody, but Caleb's dead. David's on his way to the hospital. He'll live." Sarah nodded, still shaking. The recording device felt heavy in her pocket, weighted with the voices of the dead finally speaking their truth. "It's over," Marcus whispered against her hair. Sarah looked at Elder Matthias being dragged away and thought about the children still trapped in compounds across 3 states, about the survivors who might finally feel safe enough to come forward. "No," she said quietly, "it's just beginning." The federal courthouse steps gleamed wet in the morning rain as Sarah clutched the manila envelope containing 20 years of her life reduced to legal testimony. Agent Martinez walked beside her, his presence both protective and reassuring as they approached the building where the final phase of her long journey would unfold. "Remember, you've already done the hardest part," Martinez said softly. "Today is just telling your truth one last time." Inside, the courtroom buzzed with controlled tension. Sarah's eyes immediately found him. Prophet Ezekiel, thinner now after months in custody, his once commanding presence diminished by orange prison garb. He didn't look at her, but she felt the familiar chill of his proximity. Behind him sat 3 of her brother's husbands, their faces masks of practiced righteousness that no longer held power over her. The prosecution had built their case methodically. Financial crimes, child endangerment, conspiracy, human trafficking, each charge representing countless shattered lives within the compound's walls. But Sarah's testimony would provide the human face to their suffering, the voice for those still too broken or afraid to speak. The prosecution calls Sarah Elizabeth Morrison. Her legs trembled as she stood, but her voice remained steady as she took the oath. Looking out at the packed courtroom, she saw familiar faces, former compound members who had found the courage to attend, journalists who had covered her story, and in the back row, David. He'd driven down from the town where she'd first found refuge, where he still ran the diner that had become her sanctuary. His encouraging nod gave her strength. The prosecutor, a woman whose meticulous preparation had impressed Sarah during their practice sessions, began gently. Basic questions about her childhood, the compound's structure, the twisted theology that had normalized her suffering. Sarah's answers painted a picture of systematic abuse disguised as divine will. "Can you describe the ceremony when you were first married?" Sarah's throat tightened. "I was 14. They called it a sacred sealing, joining me to my half-brother Marcus in eternal union. Prophet Ezekiel performed the ceremony himself, explaining that this was God's will for our family's spiritual elevation. I was taught that consent wasn't mine to give, that my body, my life belonged to the prophet and to God. Resistance was portrayed as spiritual rebellion that would damn not just me, but my entire family." The questions continued, each one excavating another layer of the horror she'd endured. Multiple forced marriages to biological siblings, bearing children whose genetic inheritance bore the cost of the compound's twisted practices, the systematic isolation from the outside world that made escape seem impossible. When the defense attorney rose for cross-examination, Sarah steeled herself for the attack she knew was coming. He questioned her memory, suggested her testimony was motivated by book deals and media attention, painted her as an unreliable narrator seeking revenge against a misunderstood religious community. "Isn't it true, Ms. Morrison, that you left the compound voluntarily? That no one pursued you or attempted to bring you back by force?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "I escaped during a supply run, hidden in a delivery truck. The manhunt that followed lasted for months. They tracked me across 3 states, threatened the people who helped me, and would have killed me if they'd found me. That's not the behavior of people peacefully accepting someone's choice to leave. But you have no direct evidence of these alleged threats." "I have the scars from where my brother husband branded me when I first tried to run at 16. I have medical records documenting injuries from disciplinary sessions. I have photographs of the armed men who came looking for me at the women's shelter where I first found help." Her voice rose slightly, controlled anger lending it power. "What I don't have is 20 years of my life that was stolen from me." The courtroom fell silent. Even the defense attorney seemed to recognize he'd pushed too far. During redirect, the prosecutor allowed Sarah to speak directly about the others still trapped within the compound's walls. "There are women there who have never known they could say no. Children being raised to accept this as normal, as holy. They can't speak for themselves because they don't even know they have a voice. That's why I'm here. That's why this matters." When she finally stepped down from the witness stand, Sarah felt simultaneously drained and liberated. The formal testimony was complete, but more importantly, she had looked her abusers in the eye and spoken her truth without flinching. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned with guilty verdicts on all major charges, Sarah watched Prophet Ezekiel's face remain impassive, his delusion of divine protection finally cracking. Her brothers wept, whether from remorse or self-pity she couldn't tell and no longer cared. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, but Sarah walked past them toward David's familiar truck. Behind her, the legal chapter of her ordeal was closing. Ahead lay the harder work of healing, of building something meaningful from the ruins of her stolen youth. But for the first time in her life, that future was entirely her own to choose.